Mark Vanderwall, welcome to the Reef Builder Studio, the first ever session of Reef Therapy IRL. How you doing, brother?
Good. Cheers, by the way.
Cheers, yeah, absolutely. Man, you were definitely a trooper. I guess I would just like to say for all the listeners that this is definitely a companion episode of the Reef Therapy Sessions podcast to a marathon 2-hour tour of the Reef Builder Studio that Mark just went through.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about all the systems, and I really tried to address it since I'm a viewer as well, a remote viewer, right, back on the East Coast, and seeing the studio through the eyes or lens of YouTube. I really am glad that we went through and did such a thorough tour, but at the same rate, it's amazing that really we just covered really some of the just great points about every tank or interesting points, and it still took us hours. We really didn't deep dive. There's still so much more that we could have discussed that we left on the table.
There was a lot left on the table. That is definitely one way to put it. I always have to look around and count how many tanks we're up to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There's about 20 tanks here. We'll just call it a nice round 10 reef aquarium displays. And if you've ever seen like a decent 2 or 3 foot tank, you can sit around one of those with a reef buddy of yours and, chew the cud for half a day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm staring at these 4 innovative marine tanks next to your mangrove display. And any one of these tanks, we could spend an hour just sitting in front of with a beer, chatting it up.
Yeah, what's really interesting is the last 2 years, I've really been shoring up the engine, right? The mechanics of the aquarium itself. And now I'm to the point where almost everything is super dialed in. And the only thing left to do with some of these tanks is curation. Mm-hmm. Like where does which coral go next to another one? Getting a little bit more sophisticated with my flow programs. My lighting programs always start, I have a pretty good template for how to do the lighting, but the flow is something I've been getting to become a little bit more dynamic throughout the day.
That was a question I didn't ask on the video, but I think you just answered it, was as we were going through these tanks, if any of these tanks were in my house, obviously there's always room to grow out corals further. There's always room to prune and build new things. But I feel like a lot of these tanks are in a really nicely mature spot. Now, I was going to ask you, actually on the video, but I didn't, was do you feel like you're transitioning into a new phase, right? It's not so much the buildup of the reefs, but you mentioned the word curation, right? Obviously, there's more to build. We talked about that mega tank over there. Yeah. There's more, and you've got plenty of room to set up even more systems if you wanted to. But it's just, for me, it's also interesting to see, and I don't know, we talked about this with Planet tanks. A lot of Planet guys will reboot their systems every once in a while, right? Yep. And you have the opportunity to do that because you have places that, okay, this coral doesn't fit my vision for this tank anymore. I've got 19 other tanks I can move that coral to, so you always have that opportunity. But do you feel like you're in a different phase or have you been in that phase for a while? I don't know.
So when I first started up the studio, I set up a bunch of tanks, and until now, I'm still in that coral acquisition phase, right? I'm still in my mind, I'm I need to collect them all, right? I want to have the living catalog of all the corals. And periodically, I don't know, maybe every 9 months, I will give myself a suspension of 3 to 4 or 5 months. Be all right, now's the time to make sure every coral's in the right place. Make sure it is on display, because a lot of the corals, they go in the coral flats first as they're kind of maturing and settling into aquarium life. And one of the biggest challenges, is even with a single group of coral, very few corals grow in proportion with each other, right? Even if you have different rates. Man, and even if you had 10 of the exact same, or 10 watermelon chalices from the wild, you know that 2 of them are gonna just grow like crazy.
Yeah.
5 or 6 of them are gonna grow like normal, and 2 of them are gonna stagnate, right? Same thing with zoanthids, right? I think Nirvana is one of those zoanthids that goes gangbusters. What's another one? The Rastas go crazy, and then some other strains just might, sit there and look at you before they really settle in and grow very well. So it's trying to balance that out across the LPS corals, across the bubble corals, across the Montiporas, the Euphyllias, the assorted, medium polyp colonies and stuff. And that's probably even worse with the soft corals, because like one soft coral will grow like a literal weed, where some others will just sit there and look at you. So I'm definitely at the point now where it's like, all right, I got enough coral, but where do they need to go to be best presented?
Makes sense, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talked a bit about it on the video, and it's probably something that you're used to being in this space, but I still think it's so cool that you have the ability to place the same coral in so many different environments with so many different light and flow situations and see differences. Like, that's got to be, I think the information derived from that over time's got to be significant, right?
It's so informative, right? Because all right, perfect example is my pink Alveopora. I've kept it in high light, I've kept it in medium light, I've kept it in like a shaded bright light tank, and then I put a random piece in the very low light, like 40-gallon SPS or LPS tank, and it looks okay and good and grows in every one of those systems. But in the low light tank, it is what you hope Alveopora would look like, with extremely long, stretched out polyps, super pink tentacles.
Oh, yeah.
And if you have one tank and a couple zones, it's going to take you a lot longer than if you have 5 pieces of the same coral and multiple zones and multiple tanks.
Yeah, and maybe I think on one of the reef therapies, I disagreed with the assessment that mixed reefs are hard. I hear that a lot. And I think you also disagree. You are more in agreement that mixed reefs are hard, perhaps. But
I believe that trying to keep every coral in the same kind of tank is the hardest thing possible.
Well, and I'm willing to walk back my statement on that, because I have successfully kept a lot of corals mixed together without problem. But now seeing how significant of a difference these corals can look like in different tanks, I can also see how a mixed reef is hard if your goal is to have every coral be in its peak color, peak example of what that coral should look like, right?
You hit the nail on the freaking
like.
head. Yes, you can keep a Welsophilia, Trachophilia alive in your Acropora tank. Is it going to look as good as if you keep it in a lower energy, cooler temperature, lower light, blue light, high nutrient environment? No way.
Yeah.
No freaking way. And I know you might get away with it for a year or two, but man, how many people do you know have had a Trachie most of their reef keeping career?
Not a whole lot.
Right? How many people do you know have had a Blastomussa Wells eye for years and years and years, so much that they have to frag it out and give it away? Because, my Euphyllia tank is just so much easier. I have a tank full of Euphyllia. I can even smush some Galaxias in there.
Yeah, it's that tank in itself. I wish I didn't have so many issues. I don't have issues growing Euphyllias, but they sting the crap out of me. I don't know what it is about my skin type or whatever that I just kind of had to abandon ship on those guys. But looking at this tank, my gosh, it's just gorgeous. But yeah, it's a very fair point, right? Is that there's not a lot of good expert advice on there of like, this is the perfect ideal conditions for this coral. We used to think that there was. I always did.
Yeah, we did.
But it's when you have somebody like in your shoes with multiple systems to kind of poke and prod and try things out, it's like, well, how did they come to that conclusion, right? Alveopora, like looking at it from some of your SBS systems where you've got some of it of the same, and seeing that and I know we don't have video, hopefully we superimpose it, but seeing it in this low light tank of yours, it was a completely different coral to me. I thought it was a different coral.
Transformed.
Yeah.
I think one perfect case study is the star mint Calastria that I've had for 20 years. You know, it looks the best in lower light. It's got the greenest mouth, the fluffiest polyps, and the brightest green stripes. But in the higher light kind of mixed reef tank, it grows way faster, like way faster. It's not even close.
Yeah, so mine, I mean, we've passed it amongst each other for a very long time.
You still have the star mint?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I have huge, the brown with the white stripe piece is usually real fleshy and huge, and the green center is very small. And one thing I noticed in your systems is the center greens, which is really the pretty part, is much bigger. But then when you started talking about the differences, I had to kind of prop my head up and look at this tank, because I'm like, well, I bet you have an example of how it grows in my tank because you have it in so many different systems, right?
Yeah. No, that's one coral that's very strange that I have seen in like standing depth water, and I've also seen it at 100 feet. And in standing depth, it looks like a moon coral, super dense, tons of coral lights, big old colony, but the pieces that we're familiar with are bigger polyps, larger coral lights, more color, more tissue. Right? So if you had, let's say, a 4-inch piece in lower light, you might have 10 polyps, and a 4-inch piece in higher light, you might have 30.
Yeah.
You know, but so you take that kind of like that virtual experience across multiple different systems, and you really start to define the boundaries of some of these corals. And that's why I have an LPS, I have 2 LPS tanks, 2 or 3 acro systems, and 1 dedicated euphyllia tank, and put some soft corals where I can.
Yeah, that, and I love the fact that, you know, in this age of hot corals, you have so many, I almost want to call them legacy corals around. Even just if we're talking simple Hydenophora, or, you know, I mean, obviously in the video we talked about the Blue Ridge coral, the pipe organs, the yellow parietes. I mean, these are classics, right? But I love that they have a place in this space, and that they're growing and they're thriving and not forgotten, I guess. I don't know.
No, I mean, to me, the rarest coral is the one that is in the peak of health.
Yeah.
You take almost any coral, right? Like just, all right, let's talk about the Christmas favia, right? Red center coral lights, you know, bordered in green. You can see that in a variety of different tanks.
Yep.
And it might be brown, might be pale, might be washed out, might be only colorful at the edges. But when you get a big piece that is just solid red and green, you don't need an orange filter.
No.
You don't need to boost the saturation, you know? So any coral in the peak of health, that is the rare coral, not whatever some, you know, trend maker says it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'll put my, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some acros. I mean, I'll take a flawless looking PC rainbow acro against any, you know, of these crazy colored tenuous. Don't get me wrong, when you zoom in, you see all kinds of crazy colors, but from across the room, you're gonna point out the PC rainbow way before you'll point out a tenuous. And you can multiply that over and over and over across tenuous, Oregon blue tort. Again, it's interesting. There's so many reefers that have pieces of all these corals, but they're almost like part of a club. Like they have a frag of it, but they haven't, or even a colony, but they haven't really like got it dialed in.
Yeah.
That's the real fun and the challenge of SPS. That's like the next dimension. Can you keep it alive? Okay. Can you grow it? Okay. Now can you grow it at a reasonable pace and have like crazy colors from the base to the branches to the tips to the polyps? That is the pinnacle of SPS keeping, at least. And you know what? Zoanthid people will tell you the exact same thing. Chalice coral people, right? Certain chalice corals, yeah, you'll grow it, you'll keep it, you'll know it's kind of an orangish echinophilia. But when you dial that coral in, and it's fleshy and it's puffy, and you know you're getting that definition around the mouth and the coralite, man, that thing glows just as much as anything else.
Yeah, and I feel like in a lot of other hobbies, the hobby trade has to argue harder for what the potential of a particular strain is. If we're talking plants, if we're talking just I don't know, other you know, I mean, I've seen this with orchid keepers and stuff, right? And it's like, look, I know what you're seeing right now is not much to look at, but the potential of this thing, and so you're chasing the potential, whereas hopefully we sort of mature into that state, because right now it seems like the discussion is not about the potential, it's just how much that polyp looks on that little frag plug on my frag rack. And it's like, and you brought it up, some of these corals look amazing, or I mean, I think you attributed this to Vincent, right? Some of these things as tiny frags look amazing, but a mother colony looks not so amazing, right? So there, I mean, there's a bit of that, of you know, we're not chasing the potential of corals as much as we are looking for that instant gratification. But hopefully we, like other hobbies, evolve back into that situation. I don't know.
I feel like one great example would be woodworking.
Yeah.
Right? If you took 10 craftsmen, carpenters, you gave them the exact same machine cut logs or pieces of wood, and they have exact instructions to build, let's just say, a chair.
Yeah.
You look at those 10 chairs, they are not going to be identical. They're just not, right? The attention to detail on the joining, the sanding, the finishing, the chamfering, you know, the little flourishes and details. You give the same exact pre-cut pieces to 10 carpenters, they're going to build 10 chairs, and one of those chairs you're going to love the most based on how they stain it, finish it, all that stuff, right? So I feel like that's incredibly lacking.
Well, you've been a rainbow fish discus freshwater keeper.
Same idea.
Baby rainbows and baby discus don't look that great, but you're buying into the adult form, and you're going to grow the crap out. And rainbows take forever to grow out.
Not that long.
I don't know, some of them, but okay, sure.
Compared to growing rock?
Yeah.
You're talking about a year for some color, 2 years for like
That's what I say.
maturity.
Some of them are about 2 years before they
and in
really...
3 years peak maturity, but then you're looking at a peak mature male, Melanotenia.
But some of those are doo-doo brownish beige for like a whole 12 to 18 months, and then they finally color up, right?
Yeah.
But you're buying into the potential, and you're going to put the effort into getting them there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we talked about, I have a friend who is not a reef keeper. He would never listen to reef therapy, but he is an African cichlid guy, and he's all about the Ad Connings books and all that. But he wanted a reef aquarium because he always comes over to my house and he's like, I love this, it's beautiful. But he just never got into the nerdy side of it, right? He just wanted to keep it. He's like, he'll talk your ear off about Tanganyika, and I threw in a bunch of green slimer, a bunch of Cali tort, because he thought the SBS corals, the acropores, were really cool. And I just kind of forgot about it. And then several years later, he just had a birthday party for one of his kids, and I show up, and this tank, I mean, he was diligent about the upkeep and the maintenance, but not posting on the forums, not reading books. Like, he's all about his African cichlids, right? This was just, and this tank is overgrown with tort and green slimer. I mean, we're talking little islands of, like dead skeleton at the surface. It just grew everywhere, and it was the most magical thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And my wife's like, hey, there's a party going on, we should mingle, we should go into the kitchen. I was like, I can't, I gotta sit in front of this thing for a while. And he didn't give two craps about, what, he didn't even know what the blue coral was anymore, the Cali tort. But it just cracked me up of like that whole, when these things grow beyond the frag stage and really just grow, man, there's just something special about it that people, I think, not all people, but people are not realizing yet.
Well, I'm not going to make any friends with this statement. I've prefaced a few statements in the past like this before, but men think that if they target numbers and hit metrics, that they should achieve the results. That maybe that's why they have a predilection for being mechanics and machinists and engineers. But if there were more women in all aspects of the hobby, freshwater, saltwater, and especially reef, they wouldn't look at the numbers as much. They wouldn't put as much weight on the numbers. They would observe the coral. Like, they have just, I don't know if it's a cultural gender difference, right? I'm not trying to get into politics and get myself in trouble.
I know, there's things I want to say without getting into trouble. But
I have walked into reef stores and noticed a je ne sais quoi, and I was like, is there a female owner of the store?
Yeah.
Is there a female manager of the store? Because you can just tell, like, there's certain flourishes that a man wouldn't put on a reef store.
I've noticed it as well. I don't want to stereotype, but women reef keepers are good at gardening a beautiful
right? We're not
tank.
talking about inherent differences. We're talking about gender cultural differences.
Maybe it's a maternal, like I've always thought, I wonder if it's like a maternal thing, that they're more just looking into those subtle cues better. I don't know. I mean, and again, I don't want to stereotype, right? But I hear exactly what you're saying.
The more we talk about this, the more we're likely to stick our foot in our mouths. So with that, we've stated our opinion.
Well, we'll put it this way: like I'm glad that there's a lot of women in reef keeping today than there was, say, 20 years ago, and I hope that trend continues because.
You mean some versus none?
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, I'll stereotype it. I can be flacked for it. I think women have something like that they're in tune to something.
Yeah. All right, before we get in trouble on that,
I'll stop.
Let's talk about something manly. Well, how did you like seeing a variety of different reef equipment on these tanks?
For me, I mean, I'm like most reef builders viewers. I don't have, I don't tinker with a lot of different equipment. So when I'm looking for a new skimmer, if I'm looking at lights, I'm going to go to Reef Builders, right? I'm going to see what you have to say about it. Part of it because I feel like you're a trusted source. The other part is I, as a friend, and I've known you for many years, I trust your opinion on a lot of things. I'll go on the forums, this and that. But just walking around here, you had like every example of skimmer that I've been curious about. Even aquariums. I've never seen a Cade aquarium in person, right? Just to be able to open up the doors and look underneath the hood and just pick it apart was fascinating to me. The innovative marine tanks, I mean, I think I've told you this probably too many times, you're probably annoyed with me, like there's a 4-foot dimension size tank that you have of theirs that I'm like, man, that is like to me the perfect size reef tank for somebody that just wants to have 2 lights on top and call it a day. So yeah, I'm kind of on that journey of like, I need to buy some equipment again because I've just fired up a new tank. And it was just great to just get hands-on with everything,
when you go to the reef shows, it's probably what you were about to say. When you go to reef shows, you see glass box after glass box after glass box on a stand, and you're just like, yeah, okay, it kind of looks like what I've seen before. But it's not until I've had Red Seas, but not until I had a water box, a Pro Clear, Innovative Marine Nuvos, and the Cade that you start to really appreciate some of the nuances.
Yeah.
When people are looking for like a high-end tank, they're almost always just talking Red Sea or water box. But Innovative Marine is probably one of the most underrated tanks, right? They don't make giant tanks. They're probably more known for their all-in-ones. Yeah. But the Nuvo EXT series, freaking awesome. The Pro Clear tanks, freaking awesome with their metal frame stands. Really good value too. The Cade is obviously, kind of getting some momentum, but when you see them all side by side, you're like, at the end of the day, they kind of all hold water.
Yeah.
They all hold water. They all have the level of fit and finish that we could only dream of 10 to 15 years ago, right? So now we're literally splitting hairs between these 4 or 5 brands. But if you rewind the clock 15 years, we're literally talking like Perfecto and all glass.
Yeah,
maybe Oceanic.
We talked about when we gravitated towards your Ultim Angel tank, it brought up that childhood memory of living in America and having these 12-inch deep, narrow wall-based tanks, 55 gallons, right? 75 was like, ooh. And then I went to Europe and I saw, I went into pet shops in Denmark and the Netherlands, and I remember just being a kid and going, like, these tanks are deep, But to your point, yeah, I mean, we are so things are so good for us in this hobby now. But the other thing too is you get on the forums, it's like, what's the best light? What's the best light? What's the best skimmer? And then you walk into the studio and you have aquariums lit by every light on the market, every skimmer on the market, and they're all drop dead gorgeous. So who gives a crap what the best is? You know, you can achieve a great reef tank with all of them.
That's really what I was trying to achieve here at the studio.
Yeah.
Is demonstrate that, okay, there's a baseline, there's a floor.
Sure, yeah.
But whether you have Neros or Vortex or Toonsies, like, you're gonna get the flow. Whether you have a MaxPact, a Radion, a Kessel, a Hydra, an Acro Optics, an Aquamax, an Illumagic, if they're selected for the right application and tuned for your application, it's going to be amazing, right? When you look at all these tanks and you look at all the tanks without looking at the lighting, you're like, oh yeah, everything's fine.
Yeah, and if your tank sucks, maybe it's not the equipment, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, not to be a jerk about it, but
you will not find two more avid metal halide enthusiasts than you and me.
And there's not a single metal halide lighting a single tank in here.
One metal halide lit tank is equal to 3 LED lit tanks.
Right.
And I mean, early on, I just developed a distaste for replacing lamps, right? Because you have this drop-off curve, and it's like internal combustion engines. Like, obviously they're all around now, but you can see a future where like they're only going to be in old classic vintage cars. And so having LEDs lights that are programmable, controllable, multi-spectrum, very low heat, super efficient. Like, I could see myself, you know, just like revisiting our heydays of Iwasaki 65K with pulse start ballasts and a giant Luminarc reflector, but you know, for nostalgia's sake. But it wouldn't necessarily achieve crazy better results than the right LED lights today. And it would certainly cost a lot more to run, and it would produce so much more heat.
And I was a late adopter, partly because
says the guy who had Mazras.
Well, but I abandoned ship after that, right? And part of that was that I was coming in with a large tank dimension size, right, a 6-foot tank, and to properly light a tank back then, you did have to spend some coin, right, with LEDs. So I would revert back to at the time, the more affordable options like T5 metal halides. But I remember when I built my 225, I was like, I'm going full metal halide. I did it for 6 months, and the heat, it was like in your mind, the nostalgia is great, right? But then when you execute on it again, you're going, you know, it's like being in your 40s and thinking you can relive your 20s. And then you go out there and you're like, you know what, I just want to go home, you know? And that's what happened with metal halides. I was like, this sucks.
Not to mention having a lighting fixture over your tank that is at least 12 inches deep, like 24 by 24. Like,
I had this big old, and then I went to T5s for a while, you know, and then I remember calling you up. I was like, you know, because I hate T5s. I hate that flat look, right? And then we talked, and I ended up back in the LED realm, and now I'm not coming back out of it. But yeah, I get a lot of those guys that have that nostalgia, or maybe still running it, but there's so many options, the LED. If you can't find one that makes you happy, then it's not the lights, it's you. I mean, I'm looking around here, and if you can't find a single LED fixture that just, you know, checks all the boxes for you, then maybe you need to reevaluate what your boxes are, right?
If I had to define the air quote best LED light fixture, it would be a previous gen LED, right? Because you can buy it secondhand. There's a lot of information on how to use it. It's going to be cheaper, and it's going to be probably used for like a couple years.
Yeah, because people are on that upgrade path. Right?
Yeah. You know, the power supply will be broken in. The fan has been, you know, tested and proven to work. You're not going to be overwhelmed with power and choices and features. But yeah, best LED light, it's last generation's LED light as far as best. If you want the highest performance or the best value, then it kind of, you know, splits off and goes in a different direction. But if you just want like a blanket best, I mean, the Radeon Gen 5 is an incredible light, and I know a lot of reefers who just don't want to give up the Gen 4s. And I'm part of that crowd, you know, I'm gonna go half and half. So I'll keep some Gen 4s around. I might even mix and match Gen 4s and Gen 5s when I finally get around to the 400.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I think I said it before, that ship has sailed for me. The Kessels that I ended up with, to me, it's like I have halides again, you know? And I know, well, I get it. And I get the sticklers are gonna say beam forming versus point source light and a parabolic reflect. I get it, I'm taking the non-sciencey, I'm sitting on the couch drinking a beer, staring at my tank attitude.
Staring at your tank.
And if you're staring at, I'm looking at it, your mangrove tank right now. If I'm staring at that tank, drinking a beer, like to me, that reminds me of those days.
Yeah.
It's got a nostalgic vibe to it that I missed.
I am actually, when it comes to the A500X, I am super excited to see people making their own reflectors.
Yeah.
I want to see somebody pop an A500X into a metal halide reflector, right? Because the native beam angle is 120 degrees. So if you pop that into even a small metal halide reflector, of course you're going to have better spread than the, you know, very efficient but admittedly small 2-inch little clip-on reflector lens thingies that they have to date. You know, I actually experimented making some with doggy bowls with mixed results, but it was actually kind of blocking the air intake at the bottom. But I don't see any reason why somebody couldn't like just make a little cutout in the top of a typical metal halide reflector, stick the A500X in there, and then I don't think you could tell the difference. I really don't.
And I mean, maybe this will piss off all the metal halide people, but I found the huge Luminarc reflectors annoying. So I was the one that eventually graduated to double-ended bulbs in tiny Aquametic and Giesemann fixtures, right? Because I like the clean look of the fixture, I like the simplicity of the cords, I like the little UFO hanging above my tank, right? It didn't look like I was trying to grow a bunch of weed.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said and how fun that was once upon a time.
Yeah. But a bunch of Luminarc reflectors, or I mean, like the double-ended halides didn't have the best reflectors either, man. But they grew the crap out of corals, and so maybe that's my disclaimer: is when I sit in front of a Kessel A500, it reminds me of me running double-ended halides.
Absolutely.
Right? You don't need. I get that the bigger the reflector, the better for a point source light, but yeah, I don't know. And it's funny that I've heard people complain that the higher you mount them, the less the glimmer is, which I don't quite see that because yours is way up there. But one of the arguments against the Kessel was that it has too much glimmer, and that makes it not feel like a halide. So I don't know like what the argument there is. But I mean, I'm very happy with them. But I was also happy with the AIs. I don't have an experience with Ecotech, but I don't think I need to. I mean, those lights have proven themselves through and through, right? I don't think anybody's going to argue whether Ecotech is a successful LED light.
Did you notice? I know we've talked about lights for a little while, so maybe we could talk about something. Did you notice how little rock is in each tank?
Yes.
There's just enough rock to hold up the coral. Meanwhile, the coral flats have zero rock unless it's like a giant coral, like totally encrusted on a base. Well,
and I mean, again, I'm probably being a broken record because we had a tour video earlier, but I've had bare bottom tanks, and I do like my sense of substrate, but being surrounded by all these bare bottom tanks, it took me a while to actually key in. Oh yeah, I mean, obviously we've talked about it, but I just didn't think about it for 2 seconds looking at these tanks, because the way that you have them aquascaped, I feel like the bottom of the tank is part of that reef as well. It's part of your rock work in a way.
All right, listen, I've been diving on a lot of reefs. I'm not trying to flex, but there's certain corals you find around sand, okay? Scalenia, no. Dracophilia, yes. Goniopora, yes. Everything else, not so much.
Yeah.
There's a few, a long tentacle plate, elegance coral. Certain fungias, certain cycloceras will we find on sand, but
fungias I always saw diving, they were always just
fungias are always in the reef.
Yeah.
When you go diving, you don't look for sand. That's a sand zone. That's a totally different habitat. That's where seagrasses grow.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where you have like razor wrasses and gobies and stuff.
And
but
what
when
do you
you're
call
looking for the most diversity,
garden eels and stuff.
Yep, garden eels. When you're looking for the most diversity, you're looking for the rock out on the reef. You're not looking for the sand.
That's a good point, yeah. It always tripped me up how delicate I was with my fungias, worried about tissue damage and the recession. And then you go diving and they're just, it's like somebody just threw a bunch.
It's like somebody took a basket of fungias and just dumped them overboard.
Yeah, I dropped some frisbees over the boat, you know, and they're just wedged in rocks in weird places. And
they're like pointed upwards and upside down and on top of each other and like overlapping. But that's fungias.
Yes.
That's not cycloceras. Like almost all the colorful disc corals being sold today, like good solid 95% plus are cycloceras. Those guys are actually almost always in sand.
All right, so what about Herpetolitha? I've never seen those diving. Where do you see those guys? We're talking about tongue corals, the elongate
I would say
plates.
mixed.
Yeah.
I would say those guys are kind of mixed. And some of those corals, you're going to find them at the transition from the reef to the sand.
Interesting.
Polyphilia, you know, slipper coral, always in the sand.
Really?
But long tentacle plates, they're usually attached to the reef or in rock.
Really?
You see them all the time. You're like, is that a torch coral? No, that's a long tentacle plate.
That's another one that they always warn you about. Like if you nick it or something against a rock, it's just going to recede and die on you.
It's weird how super common they are out in the wild, and it's reflected in the supply in the aquarium trade. And that's one coral I was
about to say, I don't think I saw one in here.
That's one coral I've kept at stores that I worked at, and I've never really wanted to keep one myself, because if you do get it happy, I mean, you're talking about a 14-inch diameter coral, right? In the wild, you might find gorilla crabs in them. You might find commensal shrimp. You might find some long tentacle plate pipefish in them. Like they're their whole ecosystem unto themselves.
Do you, maybe they're still around, so I won't say anything that'll get me in trouble. Exotic Aquatics in Boulder?
Yeah.
Are they still around?
Yeah.
Okay. So back when I was in college in Boulder in the 90s, I remember going in there and they had, I would say that their reef displays, or sorry, their corals for sale weren't all that back in the day, right? But it was, but they had a display tank right by the front door, and I think it was like a 90-gallon, and they had a heliofungia that was just massive. And they also had a goniopora that was just thriving, which threw me for a loop, because back then gonioperas were, you know, not easy to keep. And that was the first place I ever saw Bangai cardinals. I think they had some pajama cardinals mixed in there too, but that heliofungia was exactly what you said. It was like, eventually that thing was going to take over the whole tank.
Yeah.
And that's the only time I've really seen a healthy, growing, taking over the tank heliofungia. I mean, the more we talk about it, like I'm trying to think of other people that have kept them long term.
If you go into fish stores and if you go to wholesalers, they will never not have Heliofungia actiniformis, long tentacle plate. If you go to reefer after reefer after reefer's house, you will almost never see a long tentacle plate kept long term. I know we had those troubles with flower pots in the past.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've somehow mysteriously gotten past that. Elegance corals, they were hardy, and then they weren't, and now they're hardy again, and people are fragging them up.
That's such a trip.
It's so bizarre, and we still don't know why. We don't have really good answers. But long tentacle plates, I mean, unless you're Julian Sprung and really paying attention to, you know what, we're gonna mention Julian Sprung every session. We just have to. That's gonna be our calling card. Unless you're someone like him really paying attention to details and the care requirements of that exact coral and keeping it super happy and making sure to get a very healthy specimen to start.
He should put a heliofungia in his little patio pond. Maybe he already has.
Maybe he already has.
Yeah, he probably already has. But I saw those pictures with the urchins and the bangais. But that would be a perfect little place to put one of those.
Yeah, you know, but you'll see here in the studio, you'll see some, I guess, cutting edge corals. I don't know. I don't want to call them limited edition or premium, because
no, but like I said,
what's a premium coral anyway?
There's
no such thing as a premium coral.
It's the coral that has the 15 minutes of fame, right? But I'm looking at all these other corals that you have that are just classics, and they're way cooler. I mean, a Blue Ridge coral from a if you're a biology kind of nerd that looks at corals and looks at their physiology and everything else, a blue ridge coral is kind of a whack coral, you know?
Yes. I'm so glad they described a second species. Because again, when you go diving, it's a majestic coral, man. That thing could be like 2 feet wide and 3 feet high.
Yeah.
Just living it up with Acropora humilis and just the highest energy zone possible of any coral.
I'll tell you a coral that you got me excited about because I'm a plate coral nerd. I love fungus. I like cyclos, herpolitha, heliofungus. That's my bag. And you got me into Halimitra. And I remember Reefer Madness had one for sale and I bought it. And that was exactly like the way you just described heliofungia. That thing took over my tank. It just turned into this massive weird thing and I had to get rid of it because it just...
Oh man, Halimitra is one of those weird catch-22s. If you're not familiar with Halimitra, imagine a fungia with multiple mouths. The mouths are usually white. The body is usually green to yellow
rim,
with a bright pink to purple rim.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you frag that up, it's going to do that anyway. Right?
I
So
should have fragged it.
you
I didn't even
should've fragged
try.
it. Dude, so Halimitra's on my list. I haven't, because there's so much focus right now on hype corals.
Yeah.
I swear, man, some importers are literally bringing in 60% Acropora tenuis, 30% torch corals, and like 10% everything else.
It's like this homogenization.
It's commoditized. The corals have gotten commoditized.
It's no wonder all the tanks look the same.
So yes, a lot of tanks are looking the same. Even acro tanks, even great acro tanks are filled with cespitose and pillow-shaped acros. I was like, oh, you got a latticella and a microclados and a tenuis and a millipora? Well, where's your staghorns, or where's your tables, or where's your digitates? You know, like, everything has become so commoditized that, man, I have to set a very wide search to find Marulina. I have not seen a good orange herpolitha tongue coral.
You sent me one.
I sent you one.
You and Vincent both sent me one. I lost one because of the bacteria, which now the acronym always escapes me, the Caribbean LPS killer that's happening right now that I brought in with mud and Aquabiomics confirmed it.
Stony coral tissue, stony coral tissue loss disease.
SCTL, yes.
STCLD.
It killed a Favia that I grew from one frag from a lady that you and I both briefly knew from one of the Atlanta things. She had like a Great Dane. Do you remember her? She has a nice radium lit tank. I lost that. I grew that from one frag, and then I lost one of the herpolithas, but I still have the other one.
So I'm a little bit of a reef snob because I did see an orange tongue coral available about 3 weeks ago at one of the reef shows. It was too skinny. It was like 7 inches long and 1 inch wide. I'm like, I love orange tongue corals, but that one's too long.
But that's that coral represents the sense of community for me, because you and Vincent both knew how much I love that coral, and you know, I briefly hosted Vincent at my house. I barely knew who he was. I didn't know who he was. You just said a Frenchman's coming to the airport. He's going to come stay at your house. And I was like, all right. And then we had a great time at Fort Lauderdale, Mackinac together. And I just briefly mentioned to the guy that I just have been on the hunt for an orange herpolitha, and he's like, oh, really? Like, I see them all the time in Bali. And then all of a sudden, like several months later, Unique Corals called me up and said, hey, we have a gift package from Vincent for you. We just need to confirm that you'll be home to receive it. And it was an orange herpolitha. And then you sent me one, and then I just felt like I'm just swimming in fortune. You know, like my favorite coral, I got two from two good friends that I became friends with because of this hobby. And that made the coral twice as valuable to me, you know,
So yeah, I'm on the lookout for some orange tongue coral. Hell, I'll even take some green tongue coral.
Yeah.
I want some slipper coral, you know, polyphilia. Just token different groups of fungids. But Halimitra, that is high on my list. Next time I see a Halimitra, I don't even care what the price is. I might haggle a little bit, but I am going to buy it. I'm going to leave with it.
I'm still on the hunt for the orange and green plate coral that you had back in your Columbia days.
Yeah, so
I've been on the hunt for that, and every once in a while I'll see one, and it's just the price on it is just so prohibitive that I can't go for it.
Yeah, so When I got this one that I have here that you saw in the K tank,
I
thought about you so
in.
hard. I have to give props to Cali Kid Corals because they hooked it up, and you know, it had a sticker price on it. I would have been willing to pay it, but the inherent value to that of that coral to me was just through the roof, you know. Yeah. Every time I see that coral, bro, I'm not even kidding. I think about you because you know, I had one literally 20 years ago.
That thing was.
I bought it as a rescue. It was orange with clear patches, and over a period of a couple of years, it just turned into like the most sensational green
like
cycloceras with crazy green splotches all throughout.
And if you're a plate, like I said, I'm a fungid, cyclo, I love plate corals. So to see that thing was just a what the heck moment, you know?
Yeah.
And forever, I have those pictures on my computer. I mean, I look at them at least once a year. Like that is another, I can't, I mean, we talk about the hype thing and the trade and the prices of corals these days, and we've covered that in Reef Therapy, and there's part of me that just wants to fight back. Not protest, not, you know, not
resist.
Yeah, I'm not trying to start a revolution. I just, on a personal level, I'm like, I can't do it. I can't go into the $400, $500 range, you know.
We've both been
speaking. I mean,
we've both been reefing long enough to ride out these bubbles, right? So right now I'm using the torch coral aquapore tenuous fixation to try to scoop up any coral that isn't that, right? Like a turbonaria is just an awesome coral.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not Instagrammable, but when you look at it in real life, it's just so fleshy, and you got thin types that grow like awesome. You got thick types with super fat polyps, and yeah, you know, no one is fighting for turbonaria strains right now.
And they're such great corals. Oh my gosh.
You want to know something funny, man? So that neon green Turbonaria reniformis, I got that, I think, back in 2013, visiting Raj and My Reef Creations in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I kicked around that frag for 5 to 6 years before I really started growing it. I have a superpower of not killing corals. That doesn't mean I grow them.
They hang out with you.
They just hang out and kind of sit there and look at me, and then eventually I get my act together, or I put them in the right spot, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'm good, I'm happy now. I'm gonna grow for real.
So one area that I won't wait it out anymore on is fish, because think about the coral trade is anybody can frag it and increase its population density in the trade, right? But when it comes to fish, that's not the case unless we're talking like clownfish. And I'll say one of my biggest regrets in life was when Frank Bench was, and am I saying his last name right? I hope so.
Close enough.
When Live Aquaria has $600 resplendent angels for sale, and I was like, you know what? In 5 years they'll be cheaper. And then he stopped breeding them, and that, I mean, ever since, I think it was an Aquarium Fish magazine, Charles Delbeek did a bunch of articles about reef aquariums in Aquarium Fish magazine's early 90s. And he covered, name drop again, Jillian Sprung's 15-gallon tank, and there was a resplendent angel swimming around in it. And I'm like, what is that? And so all of a sudden it just became on my radar for the rest of my life. I regret not buying that fish when he was breeding them, and I hope one day somebody picks up that torch.
Well, I mean, that's why I have a pair of African flamebacks. I'm actively trying to get my hands on some Brazilian flamebacks, or also known as
that whole complex is
the Brazilian fireballs. You know, that's kind of my stand-in. They're not quite as yellow. Like the Brazilian one has a little bit more yellow in the top compared to the African, which is a little bit more orange. But the Euphipops, I think that's how you pronounce the subgenus. They're just awesome fish, man. Almost to a fault. So I have two pygmy African flamebacks, angelfish, in a 6-foot tank. Dude, they will go after fish twice their size. Like they practically are the most aggressive fish in that entire tank. I have a triggerfish, I have a yellow tang, a spot cinctus clownfish.
It's not a peaceful community.
You know, a big old tinker eye angelfish and a big old black tang. And the fish I have to look out for is the pair of acanthops.
Tinker eye butterfly.
What did I say?
Angelfish?
Yeah, tiger red butterfly. Looks like he's ready to go to sleep.
Have you ever seen these two spawn at night? Like
to be honest, I can't say I have.
Okay, because they seem like they're like a match made in heaven, size-wise and everything.
Funny thing is, the fish tank is the only one that is not on a regular timer. That is the only light in the entire studio that I manually turn on and off every day. And now that you said it, I'm just like, oh yeah, I should put a timer on there so the acanthops know when it's time to get down.
Put one of those Vossen larval collectors in there and see what happens.
Yeah. No, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, irregular lighting period. They have no idea when it's going to be nighttime. I might turn the light off at 4 or 5 when it's still light out here. I might turn off the light at 10 when it's totally dark out here.
It didn't even cross my brain until this new tank build that I could have a pair of centropyg, right? So I just paired up my Flame Angel and the minute I did it and I'm watching them interact and things are working out pretty good, I sat there, I'm like, why didn't I do this sooner?
Yeah.
Why did I always sit around and live with like one pygmy angel in my reef aquarium? And I know you don't keep pygmies in your reefs. We've talked about that. I'm a little more like
cavalier.
Well, yeah, you know, if I can't keep coral X because of that angel, I'll just, you know, strike that coral from the list. I love angels so much though, you know.
Me too. I do love angelfish so much. As you saw in the quarantine system,
that's one even I wouldn't try in a reef.
I've got a flame angel, which I did try in this reef tank.
Yeah.
And it picked up 3 things. And within days, I just, instead of like messing around, I literally drained the tank down to the bottom, grabbed the fish, refilled the tank. I have a big old trough specifically for that. But I'm kind of really curious. I would like to build up a harem of eyeball-eye angelfish and Indian Ocean lemon peels, because that's what creates the tiger pyge, and I think that would be super fun. But so I'm going to experiment, because you know we don't have that much experience keeping like super large fleshy flower pot corals. But as long as I've been doing this, man, I can't really remember instances of people complaining about angelfish picking on their flower pots.
No, I mean...
so I'd like to try a flower pot tank with pygmy angels, just to see.
What about the Euphilia tank? You don't think they'd be fair game in there?
The only thing about the Euphilia tank is I keep it kind of dimmer and bluer, and the fish wouldn't shine.
But that'd be the perfect tank for a multicolor angel. Keep it nice and dim, don't let them brown out. Keep that white.
We'll see. So we took a long look at my 3-foot Euphilia tank.
Yeah.
And kind of getting back to the beginning of this session of reef therapy, I've already had to pull out some of my 20-year-old branching hammer. So you see 2 huge colonies in there. There's 3 more giant chunks over in the coral tables. And so I would like to, after the 400 setup, is upgrade the Euphilia tank to probably a standalone 5 or 6 foot tank, and turn the 3-foot tank into a deep water acro tank.
That would be cool.
Yes. I might be one of the few people in the hobby who's just like still has a big swing for the naked, smooth-skinned Suharsinois and Pichonais and Speciosas.
Yeah, people don't really talk about them anymore.
No, they don't. Dude, if you go on Instagram and you check out Deepwater Acro hashtag, there's 100.
Really?
How is that even possible?
Back right when Zeofit hit the scene and people were really obsessed with SBS, I would say Reef Central was still in its heyday back then. There was this obsession with smooth-skinned acros. I mean, the Red Dragon was sort of the culmination of, and I was always surprised how much of a weed that coral is.
Dude, Red Dragon is
beautiful.
insane.
It grows fast.
That's one of those corals that looks amazing whether or not you're doing it right.
Yeah.
You know, in the worst conditions, it's going to be a rusty red. And great conditions, it's going to be a little bit more vivid kind of garnet color with kind of bluish lilac growth tips.
I may need to nick a frag of that from you, because that's one of those non-SPS dominant tank coral acros that you could just throw in and just give it a corner and it'll grow. It'll be beautiful. You just hack it back every once in a while. Almost like a Montipora digitata, right? Like you just kind of keep it in check. But the other thing that really struck me is you, and maybe I'm obsessed with this, but you have these spot cinctus and tricinctus clowns like everywhere. And I'm sitting here like, I've never kept large clown species, and I'm probably beating a dead horse. I've talked about this, but you really do have them in a lot of systems.
I think I got a couple from RA, and I think I got a couple from Sea and Reef.
Yeah.
And just over time, it's crazy how like the females developed. And I have another female over in the center, you know, the second coral flat. She's actually my favorite because she has the best shape. She doesn't have any funk going on. The one in the fish tank has a little bit of flared gills. He's just a placeholder. He's just there because he doesn't fit anywhere. Like, somebody wants to take that guy off my hands, he's gone. He gone.
But I'm going to offend some people. Now that I've spent some time with him in your place, they're way cooler than lightning maroons. I think they're awesome. These spot cinctus.
Lightning maroons, man. They none of them grew up to be their parents. None of them grew up. And another thing, I haven't seen any 4 to 5 inch snowflake. I'm sorry, what do they call those? Gold nuggets or solid white maroon clowns.
Oh yeah.
And what's funny is, like, at the local fish store, they literally have lightning maroons and gold nugget maroons for $20 because no one will buy them, because they're so aggressive.
Yeah.
How weird is that? That it was just like it was the fish of the decade, at least the first half of the 2010s.
Yeah.
It was all about lightning maroons, and they sold for crazy money, and then they got commoditized because they got bred so much, and now no one is in love with them.
No, and I remember when the spot cinctus came out, I think it was ORA. And I was like, well, I saw them in a live aquarium. I'm like, well, those are kind of neat. And now I'm spending time here with you, and I'm seeing so many examples of them, and I'm like, they're really cool fish.
What I like about the spot cinctus is they still have their stripes.
Yeah.
And then they have more.
Yeah.
And the horizontal stripes literally break up into spots, and it's really like a actual Picasso as far as the diversity of what you're going to get in your spot cinctus clownfish. Yeah,
it really got me thinking. I need to go down that path one day and try some of the larger clown species. The other thing is, I thought I was the only one that realized convict tangs were cool. I mean, we sort of talked about it on Reef Therapy, but you have more convict tangs than I've ever seen in one place.
I think I have 5.
Yeah, and they are such cool fish.
They're just fat, and they have not grown in length very much, but they're all super fat. And you know, when they're super happy, they're just a beautiful silvery white, really bold black stripes, and almost like not quite orange, but like a light brown suffused coloration on the top. Really neat.
I saw that in one of your guys.
I know, but I'm dying for a zebra tang, a polyzona. God, I would spend real money on some polyzonas, but right now with COVID still affecting the freight rates, it's just really hard to get anything out of Mauritius. So I don't think there's being any new polyzonas exported.
Such a crazy distribution, right? Obviously, polyzona is different than a convict tang, but when you're talking about a fish that's off the coast of Pacific Mexico, and then there's another sort of different color species of it all the way in Mauritius, you know, it's like that's some hella distribution for a fish.
Really, really weird. So you've really been easy on me. What do you think I am missing from the studio? Be you know, lay it down. Lay it down. What's missing?
Oh man.
What should I do differently? What should I, you know, try out?
I mean, I think that your tanks are geared towards peak of health corals, right? You are in the business of having way more species of corals than I would ever be, so every inch matters. And I know you have a strong advocacy for bare bottom, but with all the skills that you have, even knowing all the downsides of like a sand substrate, I'm not going to call it a sand bed because I don't actually like sand. That connotates small micron size. I would love to see you do something like that. And we brought it up in the large tank, but unfortunately you've got those closed loop intakes in the bottom, and I think that would just be a big pain in the butt for you to deal with.
That tank, because it's going to be such a high flow environment, would be so clutch for some of the original Too Little Fishies Reborn.
Oh yeah, just that reborn media on the bottom.
Since we talked about it a couple days ago, I'm really going to consider it.
Are you?
Yeah, no, Evan told me that the classic Reborn is back in stock. So I'll talk to Mr. Mann. I don't want to say his name again because we say his name all the time. I'll talk to Mr. Mann and just like, hey, do you have some of that, the coral bones? I have a quarter bag over there, and I have a bucket outside of some that I use as like rubble for mounting some coral frags or whatever. But that tank, it would be worth it. I feel like that tank would be worth it.
I feel like, obviously there's a ton of cons, so you're going into it for the visual aesthetic, but you're prepared to take on the battle of all the negatives that come with it. And then, we briefly talked about aquascaping that, and you're light years ahead of me. I'm a horrible aquascaper, but for me, I've always been fascinated with how they started cutting the rock. I think that's the Two Little Fishies product, the Stax rocks, but I assume it's Marco rocks that's been cut. But just that you can staircase it, and you can decide on the slope, and you can decide on the overhangs. You could do some cool stuff. Beyond that, I don't know what to say. It's like
more fish, more small fish, right?
Yeah.
I've kind of locked in my ways where I just have like
that's a good point.
a bunch of surgeon fish and just a few like ornamental fish, but I need to add more little wrasses, little gobies.
Yeah.
Dude, I have one goby in this entire place. It's a biotic.
I'm sure there's a mandarin in here somewhere.
Oh yeah, there's a pair in there.
Okay. But yeah, I've really grown to love the little fish that dart in and out of the rocks, and I feel like this word, I got to stop using it because I've used it a lot in the video earlier, but scale, right? When you have a lot of really large fish, you lose a sense of scale, whereas the small fish really bring it back home. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's your problem. I just think that now that you've said it, I'll agree with you. Like, get back into some of those.
I'm trying.
Fish.
I have a bunch of firefish in some tanks. It's hard to like see the small fish from all of the corals.
I know.
But I am trying. So I have some tilefish in quarantine.
Those are cool, by the way.
I am trying to get my hands on some possum wrasses,
yeah.
6-line wrasses, 4 lines, which are unobtainium now. I got my mystery over there. But yeah, I could use some more gobies and blennies and just little filler fish to just kind of live in certain holes.
No, but I'm not trying to fluff it all up, but, and I'm sure when people watch the video, I'm not very negative, I'm not very critique, I'm just like, oh, this is great, this is great, this is great. But there's just, if you're a hobbyist at home and you're struggling with limited space and you have all these ideas in your head that you just can't execute on, this place is a fun area to walk through because you've done that. You've really explored so many different types of setups. To do a Euphilia dominant tank, how many people are actually going to do that, right? I don't know. I don't really have a lot of negative to say.
Well,
Sorry.
you're my homie, and so I kind of expect that. And
but I'm not. There's nothing I'm holding back either.
Yeah, no, I know. More nano tanks.
I'd go bigger on the fish only.
Yeah, again, I have a bigger fish tank in mind, but I don't want to set anything up until I get that 400 going.
We always talk about like the pomacanthid angels, and to do those right, not to change gears on your big planet aquarium that you're about to set up, but it's, that's the kind of tank size you need to do an emperor angel or even a queen angel, holocanthus, right? That would be kind of cool. So,
man, let's talk about some fish we've never kept or some corals we've never kept, because that's something that came up when you were walking through. Yeah. So some fish on my wish list that I've always wanted and never had. I've never had an emperor angel.
I have.
I've never had a harlequin tusk.
I have not, and it's on my list.
Annularis angel was one of the first I ever had.
Oh.
And so I got the source, I got the guy, and it's just a matter of time, right? Because when I say I'm going to receive a fish, it's not like I'm going to get the fish and just drop it in the tank, right? It's going to go through one level of QT, then it's going to go to long-term conditioning where you can see his forever home from like 20 feet away. So yeah, there's some of these fish. I kind of alternate where I'm like, okay, I'm in coral acquisition mode. Okay, now in fish acquisition mode, because they take a certain amount of curation when they first arrive. I really want to set up a cold water tank specifically
style,
for
like
blue
with some of
spot.
those?
No, not
Oh.
just a cold water Rocky Reef. All I want is Catalina gobies and blue spot jawfish.
Yeah,
it could be a small tank, so I don't have to have a massive chiller.
True, yeah.
But I've had both of those, but I'm like, man, Catalina gobies is one of my favorite, and the only reason I don't keep it is because I recognize that it's subtropical.
If I ever built my own house and I could have the largest fish-only system I could imagine, I've always wanted to keep a French angel.
Really?
Yeah.
French?
I mean, every time I've ever dived in the Caribbean, Cozumel, I love those guys. I mean,
I love them while I'm diving. I'm like, oh my God, you're an amazing fish, but you're also 2 feet long and 2 feet high.
It'd have to be, I mean, a 2,000
It'd have to be
gallon, something
ginormous.
insane. Like,
Yeah.
like that tank Richard Harker used to write about back in the day or something. I love queen angels, but yeah, once you've seen a queen angel in the wild, you have a hard time justifying keeping one. But yeah, that's, to your point, there's a lot of fish I've never kept because they weren't either the best choice for a reef aquarium or they just got too big.
You know, it's also out of respect.
Yeah.
Right? Like I know I could get like a 12, 14 inch whatever angelfish and throw them in my 6 foot fish tank, and it's just, that's not my style.
No, I agree.
That's just not how I roll.
I'm not going to put a queen angel in a 125.
Yeah.
Right?
For long. For too long.
But I mean, you've seen those. I mean, they're huge in the wild. And we talked about emperor angels, specifically subtropical emperors off the coast of Africa. They're giants. I mean, it's like Kong Island down there where everything is just twice the size that you ever read about. And I remember I had an emperor in a 180 reef tank, and it was one of those where he devoured all my zoanthids, all my anthelia, all my xenia. But I loved that fish so much, I was like, cool, all right.
Okay.
So this is what we're going to go with now, these corals.
Did you grow it from a juvenile?
I did.
That's what I want.
Because that was a bucket list of mine. I wanted to get a juvenile and transition it to an adult.
That's what I want.
And then when he became an adult, he became a terror. He was like a triggerfish. He like a full-grown clown trigger.
Did he thump?
He grunted.
He grunted. You heard him grunt.
Oh yeah, when I would walk up to the tank, you could hear him like, "Hey, feed me, dude, feed me," and he would grunt. You could hear it through the glass.
That's so funny.
But he was a terror, and I had to let him go. And around the same time, I went scuba diving down, same place you did, that area, and down this Durban area, and I also went up to Moe's, and we saw these giant emperors, and I just felt bad knowing I had one in a 180 when I got home. And then I gave him to a friend who had a fish only with live rock 400-gallon tank, which in my opinion was still too small for that guy, probably long term, but better than my 180, right? I think I paid like $200 to ship him to Chicago.
Holy moly.
And
Have
I
you
didn't
visited
charge
him
the
yet?
guy for the fish. He was a friend, and I was willing to spend $200 knowing that he went to a better place where he could be the king and have this swimming room, you know, because I attributed his territoriality as unhappiness, right? He's in this squat little 180, pissed off that he has to share it with a bunch of things. I thought it was a sign of stress. I imagine if you put him in a much larger tank, he'd be a lot friendlier.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, he'd have his territory.
Yeah. So what else? What else is on your fish bucket list?
You know what else is on my list?
Because you've kept some stuff that I could only dream of keeping.
Inverts.
Okay.
Invertebrates. We used to really clearly define corals, fish, and inverts.
Yeah.
And right now, inverts are pretty much relegated to cleanup crews. There is not one single hermit crab in this freaking place. Not one. There's a handful of emerald crabs. I don't know.
Get some of those Halloween hermits, like the super orange.
I do. They're cool. I can't live with hermits that crawl over stuff, right? But last week I did get some regular feather dusters. I've had the Christmas tree worm rocks forever.
Yeah.
I have a healthy assortment of clams, but like regular feather dusters. Those used to be in every tank.
Yeah.
I have a jumbo abalone in each of the coral flats. I'm actively trying to seek out more tropical abalone.
That would be
they're
cool.
so cool and they're so hardy. I have burned through sea hares in conditions where my abalone just cruised. There's actually a really large blue Linkia starfish that I got last week.
I saw him
in that tank. So I want to get some more starfish.
Some nice Bromias, some nice
Bromias, some nice Linkias, some regular feather dusters, cocoa worms. I do have some pretty good anemones, but I don't have any displays because it's almost just like Murphy's Law. I'll leave town and they're going to find that powerhead. They'll stay in place for half a year, and the weekend that I leave, they're going to find a powerhead.
Yeah. For a long time, I was always obsessed with those little reef lobsters. They say small, but I mean, obviously those are ticking time bombs. But I've always been fascinated by those. I always thought it'd be kind of cool to put in a somewhat small tank where you're not too worried about casualties. There's a lot. You bring up a good point. There's a lot that we overlook on the invert section.
If it's not
the cleanup,
top of the news on Reef to Reef, it's completely ignored. If it's not making the headlines on Instagram, it's completely ignored. Like, I want to get a bunch of cleaner shrimp, but I just haven't gotten around to it. I do have a blue coral banded shrimp in my LPS tank and a regular coral banded shrimp, which I bought as a blue coral banded shrimp, and they sent me oh my God, don't even get me started. I don't even want to name who it was, but it was supposed to be WYSIWYG. But yeah, it needs some more cleaner shrimp in all the tanks. I wish I could get more anemone crabs, porcelain crabs, to put in the anemones.
Oh yeah.
I wish I could get more periclemenes shrimp to just have like within the hammer corals and some of the anemones. Yeah, I definitely want to fill out my invertebrates. What's funny is I have asterinas everywhere. I know I have at least 3 species. They don't bother me one bit.
No.
Not one
I thought
bit.
about I had a big blow up of asterinas, and I was able to keep a pair of harlequin shrimp for about a year without ever directly feeding them. But then they eventually disappeared, But I don't have the right population density of asterina that I would feel right trying those guys again. But that was kind of a fun experience.
Yeah.
I love arrow crabs, man, but I won't put one in a reef tank just because eventually they start to pick on things you don't want them to pick on. Sort of like, I guess, how you feel about certain angels, but I've always just loved those guys, man. I just think they're the coolest crabs, right? Like an arrow crab crawling around. But you could always set up just a dedicated tank for one of those. I just find them fascinating to watch. Yeah, inverts get a bad rap, I think.
They have no rap.
No rap. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
No one's sitting here talking about the hype, Stenopus bandaged coral shrimp that they got, and so that's one of the ways that I want to round out the tanks. But like, man, I could add like 2 or 3 regular Florida feather dusters to every tank, and it would just be a nice little flourish.
Dude, I loved your Condylactis anemone.
Yes.
What happened to those guys? Remember them?
Yeah. Condies are so beautiful.
Yeah.
That one I've been, again, kicking around forever. It's only been in its own breeder box for like 2 or 3 weeks. I've had it for 2 years. And it was actually in the acro tank, just moving around, stinging something new, moving around, stinging something new. But yeah, dude, a full, healthy, jumbo, luscious, thriving Condi anemone, that's toe-to-toe with everything except for like a blue carpet or like a jumbo ritterite. But yeah, when you see Condis diving in the Caribbean, you're like, wow.
I've never gone down the Hadoni route, the true, the big, sticky, short tentacle carpet anemones. But I've always thought that would be fun to have in a species tank.
Yeah, I just so I don't have any carpet anemones, but I have a couple pizzas, and I'm trying to figure out, how to keep them happy. So they're decent colored, but they've lost most of their colorful rim, and I'm trying to figure out how to get that rim to come back. And the catch-22 by the pizza anemones is they come in crazy colors, but they will literally eat every fish that isn't a Clarkeye clownfish, because other clownfish will try to host in it, and they will get stung and they will get eaten. It's incredible.
Wow.
So they're going to have like a dedicated display in the future.
Well, and I know people have had good luck with the Hadoni anemones in certain reef situations. I know some folks have said, if you put some moonlighting above them, the fish can see where they're going and avoid it. I just can't take that chance. I would do a dedicated tank for one of those carpets, but I don't know. It's just not worth it.
Cool. Well, we've been rapping for about an hour. Do you have any closing thoughts for this companion session of reef therapy to the videos we put out on YouTube?
No, I mean, all I got to say is, I mean, we kick-started this reef therapy thing during the whole era of COVID, right? And like many folks, you know, I'm working from home in the basement and chatting with you then we did the video cam and we're remotely chatting, and I really enjoyed that. But it's just, I feel glass half full about a lot of things, just being able to hop on a plane, come out here. Obviously, you know, the predominant thing was to see some family out here, but to get to spend 2 whole days with you in this setting and just catch up in person, I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate the graciousness. You've been, you know, hosting me. You've been buying me beer and food. I've been living it up and enjoying it.
Well, thank your wife for me.
Yeah, no, I just
one of these days I'll actually meet your children.
Yeah. No, I'm really grateful, and I feel like for me it's just a sign of the times that things are going back to the normalcy that we all miss, right? No, I've had an amazing time. You know, it's almost overwhelming just because you have so many corals that it was. I don't know. I've just never seen so many different species of corals in one place. Yeah, I loved it. So I thank you again for your graciousness of hosting me.
All right, well, that's the European Mark Vanderwall coming out.
That's the warm. I'm feeling the warm and fuzzies. No, I just really appreciate it. I've had a lot of fun.
No, it was cool. It's cool having you out here and just really talking reef hardcore. And man, I want to visit some other people's tanks too. You know, every time you see someone else's tank, it reframes your own aquariums and your own hobby and your own perspective on reef tanks and saltwater fish overall. And you know, going to reef shows is one thing, and it's cool to see a bunch of models on the runway. And it's another thing to go to people's homes and see their corals and their livestock in a long-term setting.
Well, and to build on that note, I mean, Instagram pictures and all of that, we've talked about that. This time with you in the studio and just talking corals and deep diving some of your systems has inspired me more than anything online. You know, just getting with your reef buddy and just shooting the breeze and drinking a beer together and talking corals is the penultimate source of inspiration for your hobby and for your tank and for your passion.
Cool. Well, we can't host everyone here, but I would definitely encourage everyone listening and or watching to really connect in a tangible way with your local community, with your local reefers. Go check out their tanks.
That's what was missing in COVID, and I know everybody's got different comfort levels about that right now and vaccinations, but you know, if your comfort level is there, man, that's what's been missing for a while. You know, get back out there.
Yeah, go see some other reef hobbyist tanks, keeping it real. You know, connect with your local reef club. You know, the virtual connection is not a substitute for going to visit an established reef tank of all different types. And compare notes and share frags. Don't sell them to each other. Just give them away, man.
Well, I didn't go to Reefapalooza. You did, but I remotely watched every video about Reefapalooza. The one you did, the one that many others did, and the energy in those videos. You could tell that everyone was excited to be back together and talking reef. And you could feel that through the screen. So.
Well, very cool, man. I hope you can make it out next year because we have a lot of progress in the works here at the Reef Builder Studio. I'm going to send you some care packages of some corals, and I know you're overwhelmed, so you don't even have them picked out, but I have them picked out. Like I know which corals.
You're like, well, so what corals you want? I'm like, I don't even know.
Yeah, I know what kind of corals are really going to push your buttons in a good way. So Mark, thanks so much for being here. And if you're just listening to this on a podcast, just again to remind you, this was a companion session of reef therapy to accompany what is likely to be a 2-part video tour of the Reef Builder Studio with me and Mark in the house. So thanks everyone. Make sure to subscribe and comment and like wherever you're enjoying this content, and we'll catch you guys on a future episode.
All right. Thanks, Jake.
All right. Thanks, Mark.